$90 million. That was the number splashed across headlines, the number that stopped scrolling thumbs, the number that signaled not just a lawsuit, but a political earthquake. $90 million lawsuit. A career on the edge of total collapse. The words were everywhere. On phone screens, breaking news tickers, whispered in hushed tones across Washington. But this wasn't just a headline. It was the sound of one career teetering on the cliff's edge, ready to plunge. The scene could have been mistaken for the opening act of a political thriller. A courtroom buzzing with tension, every seat filled, the air thick with anticipation. Cameras clicked, commentators whispered, and yet all eyes were locked on two figures. On one side, Kash Patel, once smug, powerful, and untouchable, now visibly rattled. On the other, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, steady, composed, radiating the kind of controlled fire that only comes from knowing the truth, is finally on your side. This lawsuit wasn't about numbers alone. It wasn't even about Patel's career. No, this was about something larger, something rawer, something every American has felt in their bones. The fight between dignity and arrogance, between truth and corruption. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just filing a case. She was drawing a line in the sand. She was saying that even in a system stacked against the underdog, even against names backed by power and wealth, integrity could still stand tall. Every detail seemed cinematic. Patel's lawyer shuffled papers, trying to disguise trembling hands. Reporters scribbled notes, already crafting narratives. And Crockett? She didn't rush. She didn't falter. She let the silence stretch until it felt like the whole room was holding its breath, until it was clear this moment wasn't just legal, it was historic. But here's the thing. This wasn't only about Patel's downfall. It was about what Crockett's move symbolized. It was about accountability, finding its voice in a country tired of watching the powerful walk free. This $90 million strike wasn't a whisper of protest. It was a roar that echoed beyond the courtroom walls, a signal that arrogance was finally meeting its reckoning. And yet, what truly stunned the nation wasn't just the lawsuit itself. It was how Jasmine Crockett launched it. A method so bold, so unexpected, that it left Kash Patel and the entire country in absolute disbelief. To understand why this lawsuit sent shockwaves across the nation, you first have to know who the players are. Kash Patel wasn't just another political operative. He was a man who thrived in the shadows of power, maneuvering behind the scenes with a grin that said he believed he could bend the rules without consequence. Former aide, legal advisor, political strategist, his titles varied, but his reputation remained the same. Fiercely loyal to his circle, dismissive of anyone outside it, and more than willing to push boundaries that others wouldn't dare cross. To his supporters, he was cunning. To his critics, he was arrogant, a symbol of how deeply entitlement had rooted itself in the political system. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman whose story was the very opposite of Patel's. She wasn't born into privilege or power. She built her career on grit, intellect, and an unshakable commitment to the people she served. To her community, she was more than a politician. She was proof that someone who looked like them, who spoke like them, could rise into the halls of Congress and demand to be heard. To many immigrants, minorities, and working-class families, she represented the dream that perseverance could break through walls of exclusion. So when Jasmine Crockett filed that $90 million lawsuit, it wasn't merely legal paperwork. It was a collision of two Americas. Patel represented the entrenched elite, the insiders who believed rules were made for others. Crockett embodied resilience, the voice of communities long told to wait their turn, long told to stay silent. Their clash wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. It forced America to confront the question, whose voice really carries weight in this democracy? Within minutes of the lawsuit hitting the newswire, the digital world caught fire. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett90million, hashtag Justice Over Power, and hashtag Patel Exposed surged across Twitter and TikTok. Instagram flooded with reels dissecting the case, some dramatic, some celebratory, nearly all fixated on one message. This wasn't just Crockett versus Patel. This was dignity versus corruption. The responses were visceral. One viral comment read, "She's not just suing Patel, she's suing every arrogant politician who thought the rules didn't apply to them." Another wrote, "This is bigger than $90 million. This is about the soul of American politics." For millions watching from their living rooms and phones, this wasn't distant legal drama. It felt personal, as if the verdict would say something about their own worth in a country where powerful men had so often escaped accountability. And make no mistake, the stakes couldn't have been higher. For Patel, this wasn't just about money. It was about survival. A loss here meant his reputation, his career, his network of influence could evaporate overnight. For Crockett, victory meant more than damages. It meant sending a message that the rules could not be bent forever, that truth could cut through arrogance like lightning splitting the night sky. But here's the twist. The lawsuit itself was only the beginning. What Jasmine Crockett had set in motion would ripple far beyond the courtroom. This wasn't about a single career. It was about reshaping narratives in Washington, about igniting a national conversation that Patel never imagined he'd be forced to have. And as Patel sat there, lawyers scrambling to decide, he couldn't possibly predict what Crockett was about to reveal next. A revelation that would escalate this battle into something far larger than even his worst fears. Long before his name was plastered across scandalous headlines, Kash Patel carved his way into the machinery of American politics with a kind of ruthless determination. He wasn't born into the spotlight. He created it for himself by learning how to play proximity politics, staying close to power, whispering in ears, trading favors behind closed doors. To those who admired him, he was sharp, decisive, a man who could make things happen in a system notorious for moving at a snail's pace. But for others, Patel represented something darker. The embodiment of a culture that rewarded loyalty to personalities over loyalty to principle. His rise was meteoric. From legal aid to a prominent voice in national security circles, Patel mastered the art of aligning himself with influential figures at just the right moment. He presented himself as a guardian of law and order, constantly preaching about accountability, discipline, and respect for American institutions. On paper, it sounded noble. In practice, it was riddled with contradictions. Behind the speeches and interviews, Patel's record told a different story, one marred by questionable decisions, controversial alliances, and whispers of impropriety that never seemed to stick, at least not until now. Patel's arrogance became his signature. He walked into rooms like they were already his, dismissed critics as irrelevant, and treated pushback as if it were an insult to his brilliance. He cultivated an image of invincibility, the kind of political operator who could maneuver through chaos untouched. Scandals surfaced, allegations of bending the rules, misusing his influence, silencing dissenters. But Patel always managed to sidestep accountability. With every escape, his confidence only grew. He believed himself untouchable, shielded by his connections and his ability to spin narratives faster than they could unravel. But arrogance has a way of leaving footprints, and Patel left plenty. Former colleagues described him as sharp but reckless, brilliant but blinded by ego. Reporters chronicled how he seemed to thrive on pushing ethical lines, treating them as little more than suggestions. Even when controversies caught up with him, Patel doubled down, portraying himself as the victim of smear campaigns. To his base, this defiance looked like strength. To his opponents, it looked like corruption parading as courage. His alliances only deepened the contradictions. Patel linked himself with power players who had their own questionable histories, men and women who treated governance like a game of chess where the pawns were ordinary citizens. He pledged loyalty to them in public, but privately, many wondered whether he was just waiting for his chance to seize more influence for himself. He thrived in echo chambers where arrogance wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. Yet even with his cultivated image, Patel carried vulnerabilities he refused to acknowledge. His rise had been fast, but it had also been fragile, built not on unshakable principle, but on opportunism. Those who build on sand may stand tall for a while, But eventually the tide comes in. The $90 million lawsuit struck at the very heart of Patel's carefully crafted persona. It wasn't just about legal consequences. It exposed the hollowness of his untouchability. For a man who spent years preaching about the rule of law while skating past accountability, facing Crockett's lawsuit was more than inconvenient. It was humiliating. It peeled back the mask of arrogance and revealed a man cornered by his own contradictions. Still, Patel underestimated the storm. He believed, as he always had, that he could spin this, control the narrative, rally allies to his defense. He believed the people watching would once again shrug and move on. What he failed to recognize was that this wasn't like the scandals of his past. This was different. This wasn't just another headline. This was the collision of his arrogance with a challenger uniquely prepared to dismantle the empire of untouchability he had built brick by brick. And in the quiet moments between court sessions, when the cameras turned away and the chatter dulled, Patel began to sense what he could never admit aloud. The cracks were spreading. His confidence was faltering. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the mask would hold. But he never imagined the challenger who was about to dismantle him. Before Jasmine Crockett became a headline, before her name echoed across cable news and hashtags trended in her honor, she was a young woman fighting battles most Americans know all too well. She wasn't born into privilege or handed power on a silver tray. Her path was carved through sacrifice, persistence, and an unshakable belief that justice should never belong only to the wealthy and well-connected. Growing up, Jasmine learned early what it meant to confront a world tilted against you. She saw firsthand how working-class families struggled to navigate systems designed to protect the privileged. Bills piled up, opportunities slipped through cracks, voices like hers often dismissed before they could even speak. But instead of breaking under the weight of these realities, Jasmine grew stronger. She developed a resilience that became her greatest weapon, the kind of resilience that doesn't just survive storms, but learns how to stand taller because of them. Her education wasn't just a personal achievement, it was a declaration. Law school wasn't glamorous for Jasmine. It was grueling, filled with late nights, self-doubt, and the constant pressure of proving that she belonged in spaces where women like her had historically been told they didn't. Yet every time someone underestimated her, every time someone dismissed her as too young, too inexperienced, or too outspoken, Jasmine sharpened her focus. She studied harder, spoke louder, and refused to let the door close behind her once she pushed it open. After graduation, she didn't choose the comfortable path. Instead of pursuing lucrative firms or elite offices, Jasmine turned her energy toward activism and community service. She defended those society often ignored, the voiceless, the marginalized, the ones ground down by systems that claimed to serve them. She built her reputation in courtrooms where nobody was watching, fighting cases that wouldn't make headlines but changed lives nonetheless. In those small victories, she found her calling, using her voice not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told to stay silent. Her entry into politics wasn't about ambition for ambition's sake. It was about necessity. She saw how laws were written without the input of those they affected most. She saw how arrogance at the top trickled down, crushing communities at the bottom. So she ran for office, and she won. In Congress, Jasmine became known for her fiery speeches, her unwillingness to be talked over, her refusal to accept arrogance as a substitute for leadership. She didn't posture. She didn't perform. She spoke truth, even when it made people uncomfortable, especially when it made the powerful squirm. But what set Jasmine apart wasn't just her courage in the spotlight. It was her calm strength behind it. She carried herself with a dignity that resonated with millions of everyday Americans. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She let her conviction do the work. And when opponents tried to belittle her, when they mocked her background, her accent, her identity, she didn't crumble. She turned every insult into fuel, every attempt at silence into a louder call for justice. To her supporters, Jasmine wasn't just a politician. She was a mirror. She was the embodiment of what so many longed to see. Someone who came from the struggle, who wore those scars openly, who carried their stories into the halls of power. She was proof that resilience could climb the very ladders arrogance thought it owned. And so, when her path collided with Kash Patel's, the contrast couldn't have been sharper. Patel, with his smug belief in his own untouchability, and Jasmine, with her steady refusal to bow down. He represented the arrogance of the old guard. She embodied the dignity of the new. Their clash wasn't just inevitable. It felt destined, like the collision of two forces that had been barreling toward each other for years. The stakes were higher for her than for most. This wasn't just about a courtroom battle or a political feud. For Jasmine, it was about showing the millions who looked up to her that they weren't wrong to believe, that they weren't naive to think justice could still win. Every word she spoke, every move she made, carried with it the weight of communities who had been silenced for too long. And so she prepared, not with arrogance, but with determination. While Patel underestimated her, laughing off her resolve, Jasmine sharpened her case. While he treated the law like a game, she treated it like a weapon, not for destruction, but for justice. She didn't need to outshout him. She didn't need to outspend him. All she needed was the truth and the courage to wield it. And when the moment came, Jasmine transformed her quiet determination into a $90 million thunderstrike. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel wasn't quiet, and it wasn't polite. It unfolded like a duel. Two figures standing on opposite sides of a battlefield that was as much political as it was personal. Patel walked in with his trademark smirk, the air of a man who believed he had already won. His words dripped with dismissal, as if Crockett's very presence was beneath him. He leaned into arrogance the way others lean into charm. "This is laughable," he sneered, waving off her arguments as if they were a nuisance. His allies chuckled along, feeding the illusion that Patel was untouchable. He raised his voice, threw around insults, and played to the crowd like a performer convinced the stage belonged to him. But across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't match his volume. She didn't need to. Her composure was her weapon. Every time Patel tried to drown her out, she let his noise fill the air, and then, with precise, deliberate calm, she cut through it. Her words weren't wasted. Each one struck with the sharpness of a blade, steady and undeniable. The audience could feel the tension tightening with every exchange. Patel scoffed, Crockett countered. Patel insulted, Crockett dismantled. It was a clash of styles, bluster versus precision, arrogance versus dignity. And slowly, the balance began to shift. The more Patel barked, the more Crockett's calm burned brighter. Then came the moment Patel leaned in, convinced he had her cornered. He sneered, certain his arrogance had carried the day. But that's when Jasmine struck, revealing the bombshell that would shake the room to its core. Because Patel thought he held the upper hand, until Crockett unveiled the $90 million lawsuit. The moment landed with the weight of a thunderclap. Jasmine Crockett, steady and unshaken, announced the filing of a $90 million lawsuit against Kash Patel. The number didn't just echo, it thundered. $90 million. Each syllable carried enough force to strip the arrogance from the room. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Patel froze, his smirk collapsing into a hollow stare. His lawyers shifted uneasily, whispering frantically as if words could stitch back together the confidence that had just shattered. The arrogance he had worn like armor cracked in real time, and everyone watching could see it. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She let the silence work for her, every pause magnifying the impact. "This," she said with precision, "is not about politics. This is about accountability." The words landed harder than any insult Patel had hurled. The room reacted as if a lightning bolt had struck. Commentators gasped audibly, reporters scrambled to get the headline out, and phones lit up with alerts. Within minutes, Twitter was ablaze. Hashtags surged. Hashtag Crockett 90 million. Hashtag accountability strikes. Hashtag Patel exposed. Memes and clips shot across timelines like wildfire. This wasn't just a legal move. It was a cultural moment. Crockett had turned Patel's arrogance against him, using the very stage he believed he owned to dismantle his facade in front of the nation. For Patel, the realization was devastating. The rules of the game had changed, and he was no longer the one in control. But as seismic as this moment felt, the lawsuit was only the beginning. The shockwaves didn't stop inside that room. They were about to spread across the entire country. The lawsuit filing didn't just end a confrontation. It detonated a political earthquake. Within hours, the story dominated every major network. CNN rolled breaking banners. Fox scrambled to spin. MSNBC called it a watershed moment for accountability. Across TikTok and Twitter, clips of Patel's stunned face racked up millions of views. The phrase $90 million thunderstrike trended globally. Memes flooded timelines. Patel frozen mid-blink, overlaid with captions like game over. Influencers stitched Crockett's mic drop delivery into dance trends, while political commentators dissected every word on live streams that pulled tens of thousands of viewers. On Reddit, one user summed it up simply: "This wasn't a lawsuit. This was history unfolding in real time." The ripple effect didn't stop at social media. Politicians, some allies of Patel, began to distance themselves. Public statements grew careful, evasive. "We'll wait for the facts," they said, their tone betraying unease. Others openly praised Crockett. "It takes courage to stand up when the stakes are this high," one senator tweeted. Donations to Crockett's campaign surged overnight, small dollar contributions pouring in from every corner of the country. For Patel, the fallout was immediate and brutal. His inner circle fractured. Longtime allies canceled appearances. Law firms once eager to work with him suddenly stopped returning calls. The aura of invincibility he had cultivated for years dissolved in a single day. The man who once strutted into rooms as though they were his now-found doors quietly closing. And yet, for millions watching, the meaning of this moment stretched beyond Patel's downfall. It wasn't just about one lawsuit. It was about proof that arrogance could be challenged, that power could be shaken, that dignity could roar loud enough to shift the narrative of a nation. But as the country reeled, one question lingered. What would Jasmine Crockett do with the momentum she had unleashed? As the dust settled from a $90 million thunderstrike, America found itself in reflection. News cycles spun relentlessly, but beneath the headlines, something deeper was resonating. This wasn't just another political feud, nor was it a simple courtroom clash. It had become a parable, a story of dignity standing tall against arrogance, of accountability piercing the armor of entitlement. Jasmine Crockett had not only confronted Kash Patel, she had crystallized a truth that many Americans longed to see confirmed: that no one, regardless of connections or power, is above justice. Her decision was more than strategy, it was symbolism. Every word she spoke in that courtroom-like setting echoed the frustrations of countless citizens who had been told their voices didn't matter, that corruption would always win, that the powerful always protect their own. Her story reminded viewers of a universal lesson: resilience matters. Crockett's journey, from her struggles, through her education, to her rise in Congress, wasn't just her own. It became a mirror for millions of immigrants, working families, and marginalized voices who had fought uphill battles with little recognition. Watching her deliver that lawsuit with unwavering calm felt like watching themselves, finally, being heard. For Patel, the lesson was brutal. He had lived as if untouchable, weaving himself into networks of influence, speaking of loyalty to law while bending it for gain. His collapse served as a cautionary tale. Arrogance may shield for a time, but eventually, truth has its day. The irony was sharp. A man who preached accountability found himself buried under the weight of it. But the resolution of this story was not about Patel's downfall. It was about what rises in its place. Crockett reframed the moment into something larger than herself. In interviews, she emphasized not vengeance, but responsibility. "This isn't just my fight," she said. "It's about the values we all claim to believe in: honesty, service, justice. If those don't mean anything in practice, then they mean nothing at all. Her words struck chords across communities. Town halls echoed with renewed discussions about integrity in politics. Social media threads transformed into spaces of pride, where people shared their own battles against unfairness. Students cited Crockett in classrooms. Activists held up her courage as a rallying cry. The moral lesson was undeniable. When confronted with arrogance and corruption, silence is not an option. Courage, even when wielded by one voice, can ripple into movements that reshape the national conversation. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett proved that fighting for dignity isn't just about personal victory. It's about restoring faith that justice is possible. But even as Americans drew inspiration from this chapter, the question remained, would this momentum last, and could it reshape the future of politics itself? And so, the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel became more than a legal battle. It became a defining story of courage versus corruption. A $90 million lawsuit shook the foundations of arrogance and reminded America that truth still has power, even in the face of those who believe themselves untouchable. For Crockett, this wasn't just about a courtroom victory. It was about showing the country and the world that dignity speaks louder than hate, that resilience breaks down walls, and that justice can still find its way, even against the strongest of odds. For Patel, it marked the unraveling of a career built on hubris. For millions of viewers, it was a signal that the tide of accountability is rising. But here's the part that matters most. This story doesn't end here. Every time arrogance is exposed, every time truth is defended, it pushes the nation one step closer toward the values we all claim to hold: honesty, fairness, and equality. And in moments like this, we're reminded that the fight for justice is not abstract. It lives in the choices we make, the voices we raise, and the courage we honor. This is why Argument Arena exists, to bring you the stories that matter, the debates that ignite, and the moments that remind us who we are. If you believe in dignity over arrogance, if you want to see more voices stand tall against corruption, then join this movement. Hit subscribe, share this story, and be part of the Argument Arena family. Together, we amplify truth, we celebrate resilience, and we make sure no one forgets. When the people speak, even the powerful must listen.